Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here with me, my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
We're continuing our Valentine's Day stuff, kind of on the nature of relationships and love. So here we go. Today's topic is Tika. We've complained at some length about Tika as a character in the past, which it's because it's from a place of love. It stems from the fact that the Tika-Caramon pairing is Margaret Weiss's favorite, and it's one of the most popular, but I don't see it for some reason. And I find it a very frustrating pairing because it's held up as the paragon of love stories of Dragonlance, when in reality I find it a non-starter. The thing is, Tika is certainly beautiful, which for a lot of male fans that seems to be enticing. Caramon is very physically appealing, which is enticing for the female fans. I won't judge that. But where I do have a problem is that Tika does not accomplish anything in the war. Actually, she is a problem. She accidentally kills Tass, and for that I find that this read fruit, it has caused this to be a frustrating read fruit. You have as far as early as Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Tan is telling her, don't go unsheathing your sword, you don't fight well, and it's treated more like as tee-hee, this is a little embarrassing, but it's kind of like being caught giving a professor's lecture in your undergarments. When in reality, friendly fire in the medieval period, no, that will not do. This is not simply something to be embarrassed about. This is a serious problem. And the only contribution that Tika makes over the course of the story is taking her clothes off. Here, the fact that Tanis and Caramon are okay with this, I think shows a moral failing on their part. Actually, that entire team has a moral failure here. And when I say that, I'm also judging Raceland, Goldmoon, Riverwind. And then there's the fact that early on when she was getting to first base with Caramon, she was also flirting with Eben, who had been hitting on her enough to cause her to blush and be pleased. She was enjoying the attention. So that, yes, I know she's young and foolish, but how committed is she to Caramon? And one has to bear in mind, he does not really tell her anything about his past conquests, it seems. She knows he's been around the block. He is determined to treat her kind of like how he treats other women. And he isn't really respectful. These are all major problems. What's more is that Tika, as she stands, does not prove herself worthy of a great character like Caramon. And I say he's a great character because he has a lot of build-up. Now, at the time when the Chronicles were first released, no. But the fact that he co-stars with Raceland and Krysania, two very complex, great characters, in a trilogy, and on top of that has a duology with Raceland, in a trilogy if you include the Brothers Magier as the third book, Caramon has starred in a lot of books. He is, in a way, the second most important companion to Raceland in the story, because Caramon's story is intertwined with that of Raceland, and the Magiers are the most important duo in Dragonlance. For one thing, any female character who gets with them has to be of prime importance and has to be a really complex, great character in her own right. This is basic writing and literature 101. Arwen is worthy of Aragorn because she's a very complex character. See our videos about her. You have Alhana, who's worthy of Sturm because even in the few pages we see of her, she's clearly a complex, great character and well written, just as Sturm is. Krysania is worthy of Raceland, and we get a good sense of her character over the course of a trilogy, and she's very well written, so she does manage to stand on her own two legs. Kitiara and Laurana have a great deal of characterization to them and get a lot of character exploration so that you can understand why they kind of stand toe-to-toe with Tanis, who's himself a fairly complex, well-written character. And you look at Conan and Zenobia, both are complex, well-written characters. Actually, all the Conan love interests are typically really well-written and complex characters. Baelit, Valyria. But the thing is, Tika is not as well-written. I'm sorry, but I have to be blunt. I know we have a lot of Tika fans. I want to be a fan, but I've grown to be irritated with how she's just portrayed as an empty-headed redhead who just wants a man, any man almost, and who takes her clothes off, kills her companions by accident, and at some point it makes the companions look dumb to bring her along when they should have just left her with the refugees of Pax Tharkus. What we were promised is not what we got. In the prelude, and even when she fights off some goblins with a frying pan, she is shown as a strong character. Within the context of Dragonlance, you have many great plots and characters. You have the story of Kitiara, Laurana, and Tanis. You have the subplot of the Magier twins. You have the subplot of Flint Fireforge and his ailing health. Tika has to stand with these giants. And as far as female characters of Dragonlance, in that regard, Tika needs to stand toe-to-toe with these characters. How would we improve her story? Well, we've talked about this a few times, but now we're going to get into it in all seriousness. In book 1, she should have actually had some chapters. There should have been an entire series. We should have gotten the burning down of Solus in real time as it's happening from her point of view, and not retcon it in the next chapter. The retconning of the burning of Solus is an insult. Burn down the Valenwoods in their entirety. A good chunk of the town was supposed to have been put to the sword. That's what it means for the town to be sacked. But to retcon it out and say, no, it wasn't. The Inn of the Last Home is still standing. No, should not be standing. Have Tika survive in the wilderness for at least a few days. In a way, it might sound weird, but book 2 of Dragons of Autumn Twilight should have been Tika's story. She survives, runs into the Heroes of the Lance, becomes a party member, and what we should get is, for the rest of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, her sword training under the likes of Caramon and Lorana. And maybe even Riverwind if he's still alive and we're ignoring Dan and I's complaints about Riverwind. Or even Tanis. Have her start to get these sword lessons and have her, yes, be genuinely fascinated by the story of Kitiara, a swordwoman, and where she wants to be like that. She wants to be a swordwoman. And not just say it so that she get brownie points with Tanis and Caramon, but have her mean it, because she's traumatized from what happened with Solus. What should also be a character motivation is tracking down her dad. Essentially, we should have a moment in the story when we get the Luke Skywalker scene of, I want to go with you. I want to be a Jedi like my father before me. We should have that character motivation. That said, we should still have her infatuation with Caramon, but I would argue you have amongst the refugees maybe an illegitimate child of Caramon. And what this would mean is that she's confronted with what Caramon has done, that he used a woman and forgot about her. But you could have this woman, maybe Caramon temporarily goes back to her or something, or maybe she was slain, and where maybe Raceland takes the kid in a little more in some ways than Caramon, because that said, you could have Caramon slowly warm up to his illegitimate kid. This is not to slam on Caramon or show him as a horrible human being. No, deep down he's a good person. He's just not very good with women. I'm just being honest. And where maybe Caramon ends up kind of bonding with his kid, and when the separation happens in Tarsus, Tika ends up with this illegitimate child, and she ends up with Sturm's team, not Tanis's. Maybe either Tass or Flint ending up with Tanis's team. This way, we swap one member between the two teams. What we get is Tika being thrust into a motherly position before she's kind of ready. And with this illegitimate kid being a symbol of innocence, in a way, or damaged innocence, that shows the extent to which this war, how dirty it's gotten and whatnot, how horrible it's gotten. And in a way, with Caramon disappearing, this kid's in the same situation as Tika was. And so we get a more mature Tika. She has to assume a parental role. With a more mature and stronger Tika, in a way, we also get her in a possible leadership position of this team, where it's Sturm, Gilthanas, and her leading it. And what we could get is that she ended up having to hone her skills in combat alongside the likes of Sturm and Lorana. And then, towards the end of Dragons of Winter Night, she fights alongside them very bravely in the Battle of the High Claris Tower, and Tika ends up leaving Caramon's child behind with Lord Gunther, who starts acting like grandpa, because he's great and he's Lord Gunther, and because he's also one of my favorite characters. Now, I'll make the argument that why not have this be a daughter or something? Why a daughter? Because daughters are greater symbols of purity, in a way. I'm not arguing against little boys, but my notion is that if this is a daughter and she has lived the life of a slave, this would kind of show her as a figure to be pitied in a way, and thus would win Raceland's affection a little more. And it would show that despite Raceland not being very open-minded towards women for the most part, which he isn't, we would get to see a more complex side of him towards his niece. And we get on Caramon's end, Caramon, who's a man's man, end up kind of melting a little with a little girl rather than a little boy. Because I think Caramon would have an easier time bonding with a little boy. And thus this makes it slightly more difficult to an extent, I think.
That would also force Caramon to view woman from a different point of view.
Yes, because he is now a protector. Because the minute you are a father to a young girl, your point of view towards women in general does kind of change, I think. If it was a boy, I think that'd be too easy. It'd be like, oh yeah, of course they bond with their young son/nephew. And of course Tika will take to him a bit more. Whereas with a young daughter, it might be more interesting if she snipes back at Tika a little, where she's got a bit of Raceland in her, as well as Caramon in personality. And so you have Tika, who has to put up with some of the worst aspects of Raceland, but also this young girl who is as stubborn as Caramon. And Caramon is stubborn. That's a good trait of his. Because often obstinacy is a good trait. And so you'd have this little scrapper who's a survivor. But for her to be left with Lord Gunther for a bit, it could also show a very tender scene between Tika and this little girl, as this girl fears that Tika's going off to her doom. And so you get this very beautiful separation scene. And you could have also had Sturm bond with this girl, where this girl has a sense of doom as they are departing and tries to warn them, say, well, we have to. And where you get a Tika who has a sense of justice and wants to go out and fight the forces of darkness and the dragon armies, and who maybe also idealizes, in a way, Kitiara, because, you know, you have those stories of her being a great warrior woman and she also wants to be worthy of Laurana and wants to protect her surrogate sister in a way. So you get a Tika who goes off to the war to fight, and you get Sturm who's been acting like an uncle. And this little girl has a sense that she'll never see one of them again, and where she might think it's both. And so it becomes a very tragic thing here. And I would say that a scene where she's chasing after the two from beyond the castle as the two depart could be a very, very beautiful scene and a tragic one. And I stress this because this would be a great moment in Dragons of Winter Night. You have Lord Gunther, on the other hand, in subsequent scenes, maybe giving this little former slave girl who's the daughter of a couple of peasants, of a sellsword, and the surrogate daughter of another tavern maid, and the niece of a red robe, which is, most people despise it almost as much as black robes, sometimes more. He is taking her in and giving her a lady's education, which would show the caliber of character Lord Gunther would. And make no mistake, he would do this, in part as a favor to Sturm, because Sturm would request this, and in part because Lord Gunther, at least as it's shown, likes kids in the story. He's very good to his people. So he would, of course, take her in and foster her. And thus she becomes a lady. And thus we get what the Magier twins were trying to do their entire lives. They were trying to do upward social mobility. The trouble is, it's not easy for Caramon and Raceland to do this. This is what they've been fighting for their entire lives up to this point. And it's a very beautiful part of Soulforge, Brothers in Arms, Brothers Magier. Thing is, Caramon and Raceland want to impart better to their children. But what this would do is show that they have done this. On Tanis's team, this would mean that rather than getting Tika to take her clothes off for men's entertainment, the entertainment that Raceland and Goldmoon provide of stories, song, and magic shows, there'd be more emphasis on that and on their troubadour skills, which would put more emphasis and importance to Goldmoon and Raceland, but I would argue also Goldmoon, because she's basically becoming a troubadour here. And this is a really cool side of her character. Let's emphasize Goldmoon for the win, because otherwise it's just a footnote. I want her storytelling, her songs written, shown, and for Goldmoon to get full credit here. And that's where, at the end of Winter Night, we have Sturm who passes. Tika's image of Kitiara is shattered, as is Laurana's, as Tika has formed a bromance of sorts with Sturm. And you have Alhana, who would have joined the team. We'd, of course, include her. She's left bereaved and essentially widowed. Tika's left at a loss because her last hero, in a way, because she idolized Caramon, that didn't pan out. She idolized Tanis. That's panned out. I don't have a problem with that. But her idealization of Kitiara is shattered. The How I Met Your Mother mirror or window is shattered. So, the glass is broken. This is rock bottom. In the next story, Spring Dawning, I'd argue Tika is a proven warrior, and let's go so far as to have her knighted as the first female Solamnic knight. I know about the one from the comics. I really like her. Great character. But let's combine her character with Tika here and say Tika's the first female knight of Solamnia. This would be really cool. And let's go even further. She's also a dragon rider. So Tika here becomes super cool. Laurana, as the Golden General, kind of screws up when she chooses to go run off. I'm going to use Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss's term here, Ninny. But this leaves the command of the army in the hands of Gilthanas, who, as expected, leads really well, because he's Gilthanas, to the extent that I wonder if maybe he was the one coming up with the battle strategies, and Laurana was just the rallying symbol, which isn't. The two have the seeds for a great romance. From there, Tika and Caramon go to pick up his kid. Caramon is broken by the loss of Raceland. You can have him turn to drink, and maybe they do settle for a short time in solace. Tika feels impatient because she wants to go track down her dad like she's always wanted, and maybe they do set off on that quest. Maybe leave his kid in Lord Gunther's hands again. But the trouble is, they rescue her father's soul and whatnot. Caramon continues to fall apart. Caramon turns to drink, and she kicks him out of the house. And he goes after Raceland, and we have the Legends trilogy. But maybe instead instead of it being Dalamar, who in a way was a rando, for him to take down Kitara feels a little anticlimactic. Have Tika do it, and have Tika's dragon defeat Sky and slay Sky, so that you have the overwhelming victory in the divine feminine for the Magier family. The warrior woman of good takes down the warrior woman of evil, and Caramon's wife slays his childhood abuser in a way. And so it's not just the good that triumphs over the male Magiers, they turn to good and whatnot and wins there. The female Magiers have a fight, but where Raistlin ends up redeeming himself, Kitara doesn't, is slain, and she's given over to Lord Soth by Tanis. But it's Tika who triumphs, so that the story almost becomes as much about her.
I like that idea because if we don't add that daughter, and she's essentially replaying Lorana's story arc.
Yeah, but it's a good thing I added that little sir in is that illegitimate daughter.
Yes, because it gives her, a similar story arc, but in a different way. She has to become her own person, and it'll differentiate her from Lorana.
And adding in her father, like that Will Turner arc, where she's searching for daddy, also adds, I think. She's daughter, but mother as well. And she's also warrior, so she's fulfilling all three of the triangular roles of the divine feminine in a way. Okay, so you're saying it's very important that she have that illegitimate daughter of Caramon to adopt. All right, and here's an idea. Maybe that illegitimate daughter either becomes, later in life, a female knight of Solamnia as well, and Caramon also get knighted, and they'd settle in Solamnia instead of Solace and get a castle. I'm strongly in favor of that kind of ending for Caramon.
Me too.
Or Caramon's illegitimate daughter becomes a mage, which for Tika and Caramon, given that this is their eldest child in a way, for her to become a mage and have the potential second to Raistlin in the family would be horrifying. They'd be terrified of this. Magic has come to mean something bad in the family. And for this daughter to have that magic, and heck, maybe she clings to the memory of her dear Uncle Raist, who was nice to her and actually treated her lovingly before her father did, and where he was the first fatherly role model she had. And you could flesh out the Raistlin-niece relationship in Dragons of Dwarven Depths, and you can have the two, and even to an extent for a brief time, Raistlin was not willing to visit Caramon, but he'd secretly visit his niece in the intervening years, so that though Caramon and Tika don't know it, when they went to chase after Waylon, Raistlin would visit his niece on occasion, so that you can further flesh out the bond. In a way, who inducted her into magic? Raistlin.
And this would help Tika and Caramon come to terms with Raistlin and with the entire concept of magic.
Long after Raistlin has passed. And when this daughter of Caramon goes to take the test, you could have her and Caramon have a big fight, and even her and Tika, and where she says, it's not magic that poisoned Raistlin. And you have Caramon who sees it as, you don't know, you weren't there. Where you have this struggle, it's a bit like Trident and Ariel, but where you have this niece who maybe argues, he wasn't all bad. We never talk about him. I want to talk about him. No, you're not the only one who loved him. It's not just you who was disappointed and hurt by his fall. I was hurt and whatnot. And where this daughter grows up and maybe initially takes the red robes and then the white robes. So that she wore the black robes to start with, because that was Raistlin, having given over some black robes, then some red robes after she passed the test, and then she becomes a white robe. And where instead of Palin, you give her this arc. You basically combine her with Palin. And from there, here's an idea, maybe pair her up with Dalamar rather than Justarius' daughter. And this way, it also means that Dalamar, who was the apprentice of Raistlin and whom Caramon would be nervous about, is getting together with Caramon's daughter. This would add complexity to the relationships and would kind of link Dalamar in with the Magiers directly. And yes, I'd be in favor of Caramon having other kids with Tika, of course. He has to have like 3 or 4. But this would add a whole dimension. Although, on the other hand, if you pair Caramon with Goldmoon, we'll have to make a separate video for that and how that should play out. But anyways, this video has gotten over long. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were the gods chucking meteors at Istar.